Atheists take a look at the Old Testament. They see that God does a few things in the Old Testament that they feel are not morally good or right, and from this they conclude that God does not exist. For example, they might look at how God instructed the Israelites to annihilate other nations, or how God dealt with David's sin in allowing his son to die. They consider this to be evil and then conclude that God does not exist. It's a strange argument. It's also not a sound argument. The summary of the argument goes like this. Premise 1, if God exists, then he cannot do evil deeds. Premise 2, the God of the Bible does evil deeds. Conclusion, the God of the Bible does not exist. This argument is unsound for a couple of reasons. We can't accept the first premise. It's not logical to demand the absence of evil deeds as a condition of existence. Let's look at it differently. We expect mothers to be kind and caring. If someone tells us that their mother is not kind and caring, can we conclude that their mother does not exist? We can't. But this is the argument, essentially. The second part of the first premise and the entire second premise are also problematic. How do we judge between what is good and what is evil? This is generally simple when it comes to the way finite humans behave. But how do we judge the moral goodness of an infinite being's deeds? Parents, when disciplining their children or when establishing order in their home, often do things that their children would consider unfair, mean, and perhaps even evil. Firstly, do their children conclude that their parents do not exist? No. Secondly, is the child correct in judging their parents' actions as unfair, mean, and evil? They might be, but since parents are generally more experienced, wiser, and have their child's best interest at heart, the child is most likely incorrect. How much more is a finite human's judgment of an infinite being's deeds likely to be incorrect? I would say infinitely. We can't be sure that God's deeds are evil. We would need to be God to come to that conclusion, which then defeats the argument altogether. Since we can't be sure that God's deeds are evil, even if we accept the first premise, which I've already demonstrated can't be accepted, the conclusion does not follow. If we want to determine whether or not God exists, we have to look for evidence of God's existence. And there's a lot. We can start with philosophical evidence, simple cause and effect. Everything that exists has a cause, and we can go back further and further and understand the cause of each cause in turn. This leads us to understand that at some point we need a cause that itself had no cause, an uncaused cause. This would necessitate the existence of an entity with the features of the God of the Bible, though not necessarily the God of the Bible. Next, we can look, for example, at the fine-tuning of the universe and conclude that it's intelligently designed. This might lead us to conclude that an intelligent designer exists, even though it does not necessarily lead us to the God of the Bible. But since the Bible provides us with a potential fit for the entity that these two arguments have necessitated, we can then start to look at some of the claims that the Bible makes and determine whether or not the Bible can be trusted. The Bible is essentially a history book. Is the history true? The Bible speaks of Jews. They exist today, and they agree that the Bible gives an accurate account of their history. So there's some evidence that the Old Testament is true. The Bible speaks of a man named Jesus who had followers that established the Christian church. Christians exist today, and they agree that the Bible gives an accurate account of their history. This is evidence that the New Testament is true. We could further look at some of the prophecies of the Bible and check to see if those were fulfilled. For example, Jesus prophesied that the Jerusalem temple would be destroyed. It was in 70 AD. The Bible predicted in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 that Greece would overthrow Medo-Persia and that the kingdom of Greece would be divided into 4 parts. This was fulfilled by Alexander the Great. Alexander died young and suddenly. At his death, he had no heir. His generals fought each other in what is known as the Wars of the Diadochi, Wars of the Successors, which left his kingdom divided among 4 of his generals. We can trust that the Bible is true. We can therefore trust that the God of the Bible is the uncaused cause and the intelligent designer that the philosophical and scientific evidence necessitates. If we look at the evidence for God's existence and then conclude based on the evidence that he exists, we need to ask ourselves why we think that what he did was evil. As many Christians all over the world and throughout the centuries have found, What the atheist considers an evil act of God is often a demonstration of his infinite love and wisdom. The psalmist writes, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." I hope you enjoyed that video. I would really like to connect with you to chat more about this as well as many other Bible topics. Please join the Rain and Roots Discord server so that we can do just that. The link is in the description below. I look forward to connecting.